got my goodies. Shall we? Right. Hi. I'm Sarah Miller. I am a freelance spirits writer and judge, also known as Gin a Ding Ding on my kind of social media platform. Rosie is just getting mic'd up, but she's on her way. She's head of new product development at Atom Brands, and we are here to talk about sustainable packaging. There we go. No gin samples, sadly. I do have a bag full of packaging goodies. If anyone, I'll sort of get them out as we go and probably put them here. If anyone wants to come and have a look at the end, they will all be available then. I'll get them out as we go. Right. So, sustainable packaging. I think we've sort of touched upon it earlier when Sandrine was talking about really it's the right thing to do now. I think we all know it's the direction of travel. Every brand pretty much is starting to look at it. But why is it so important? Well, simply put, producing sustainable spirit, producing any spirit is incredibly carbon intensive. Every element, from the agricultural production to the energy required to the packaging and transport. So it's one area where real impact can be made, It's also definitely an area of consumer demand. More and more consumers want something that treads more lightly on the planet. And a recent report from 2022, I think is quite interesting, saying 86% of consumers under 45 are willing to pay more for sustainable packaging, and 57% are less likely to buy products in what they perceive as harmful packaging. And I think the element of what they perceive is also quite important, and I think it's something that everyone who's putting out packaging that they're claiming to be sustainable has to be really clear about. And hopefully we're going to show some examples of things that are good. I think it's fair to say there's no one fit for every brand's different. There's no simple solution, but we'll get onto some examples. Do you want to?
So, I don't know where you got to, so I was getting mic'd up.
Pressure from on.
Yeah, so there's also coming in next year, I think from January, you've got the extended producer responsibility, which basically means everything that you use in terms of packaging from January this year, the records need to be taken to basically start submitting it to see how much you need to pay, depending on what packaging you're using, but obviously all that needs to be recorded as well. So that's quite important.
Yeah, and just to cover as well, the pressure from on and off trade is another factor which we'll look at.
Cool. So direct to consumer is obviously a huge part of getting your product from A to B. Sustainable shipping, it's all about getting the packaging right. So transport makes up a lot of that carbon footprint, but there's also a lot of consideration. So where are you sourcing your stuff from? What materials are you using? Is it fit for purpose? So it's all about making sure your product is great, the packaging and everything is sustainable, but then also getting it to the customer in one piece. Because if it turns up broken, you've done all that work for sustainability, but you've produced a product which is not fit for purpose. So you're not really doing any good anywhere in that instance. So that's really important.
Fantastic. So most spirits producers and most gins are bottled in glass. I imagine most people here are using glass. It is incredibly energy intensive to produce. As I'm sure you all know, furnaces have to run at exceptionally high heat. And so the carbon impact of glass is really quite high. It is good still, it's recyclable, which is fantastic, and it's inert, so it's a great packaging material, but it does come with a really big carbon impact. So one of the big sort of transitions I think everyone's seen from small brands to some of the really big brands is lightweighting, effectively reducing the weight of your bottle. And that is really important. It not only means less raw material, so simply less glass is being used to make the bottle, it impacts on the transport from the glass manufacturer to the distillery and from the distillery to the end user, so the bar, the shop, or the consumer. So it can have a real impact reducing that weight. And I think it's easy to disregard, and ideally it's part of a much bigger strategy when you look at packaging, but packaging can really impact carbon footprint. So we've got a couple of examples here. As I said earlier, there's no perfect solution, and everything will depend on your individual circumstance, your market, the size of your distillery. But a couple of interesting examples that have taken a different approach to this. So we've got North Point Distillery right in the top of Scotland. They decided to use a 100% post-consumer recycled glass, which basically means it has been out, it has been used, reclaimed from the end user, so you and I, melted, crushed down, and used again. And part of the advantage of that is melting cullet, so recycled glass, requires a lower temperature in a furnace. So that's part of it. 100% PCR you can't actually, generally can't obtain in the UK due to the recycling systems in the UK. So these are imported from Italy, and a lot of them are. Distinguishing kind of features, you get a mottled texture quite often in the glass, sometimes a lack of purity in colour. They import those from Italy by sea freight, they offset the emissions, and this is also a nice example, it's pretty light, excuse me. It's just over about 500 grams.
And it's not got a heavy base, it's sort of, you can tell it's strong, it's going to do its job, get there from A to B, but it's really, really light.
And also, actually, it's a good example, they've chosen to screen print that as well, rather than add another label with environmentally friendly inks. Quite recently launched, on the other side, on the right, is Dancing Sands, which is a New Zealand brand. I think this is fascinating. So I was only talking to them, I found out that there were no spirits bottles manufacturers producing, no glass manufacturers producing spirits bottles on a commercial scale in New Zealand until this. So every producer in New Zealand was generally shipping their bottles from China, or Dancing Sands were importing them from France. They spoke to a glass producer who was mostly doing wine bottles and started a kind of test pilot for commercial production, which is going really well. So they use what they call recycled transition glass. So that is the glass that's normally wasted when the furnace switches from an Attic blue colour to a clear flint glass. So you can see, just about here, that bottle has some colour, and they just accept that there's some variation in that colour. It's also 30% lighter than the bottles they're importing from France, and they estimate that the new bottles will eliminate 15,000 kilograms of carbon emissions from their production cycle every year. So whether you're, I know York a little while ago moved production from France to much more locally to them. Any change in that, the more locally you can produce something, the better. But that's quite a striking example.
And that's just 15,000 per year from one brand.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Shall I do that?
Yeah, I got it.
So obviously glass is still incredibly popular, it's still most widely used, but we are seeing an increasing movement away from glass, that kind of innovation that we were talking about earlier. And so we've seen a lot of movement in paper bottles, or so-called paper bottles. So the one that's probably hit the sort of headlines and actually the shop shelves the most is called the Frugal bottle. This is Green Man Woodland Gin, which is produced by Silent Pool. It's really light, so I think we've got, so it's 83 grams. It is known as a paper bottle. It's actually a sort of bag in a bottle.
It's a bag in box, smaller, isn't it? Yeah.
So so you've got the cardboard outer, and then this plastic pouch. And really, as a consumer, to be fair, it has instructions on it, but you're encouraged to then take that apart, recycle that, and then I think generally that goes to landfill in the UK. Very little, as it says up here, very little plastic film is recycled in the UK. That's one option. Sandrine also mentioned Absolute.
So I think the Absolute one is a prime example of where I think things should be going. It doesn't have two parts of packaging, it's all like one piece. It doesn't have a liner, but it's all, like, as far as I'm aware, it's all incorporated into the inside of the bottle. So you just put that straight in your recycling, and that's done. Whereas this one, it kind of puts the onus onto the consumer to do something positive. I think personally that a lot more of the responsibility should be on the producer of the packaging and of the product to make things as easy for consumer as possible. But it's moving in the right direction, and we're seeing more and more things come out. I mean, the Absolute bottle came out, a couple of weeks ago, and they're still on trial at the moment, but it's really exciting seeing things like this, really innovative things moving forward.
Yeah. So that's great, but arguably, kind of one of the best packaging materials is aluminium. Needs less protection in transit than glass. It's infinitely recyclable. It's pretty hard wearing and unbreakable. So we've got a couple of examples here. This is from Penrose. This launched quite recently, I think maybe a couple of months ago. It's 100% recycled aluminium, which is something not all of them are, and it's something that they're very proud of. And it is obviously infinitely recyclable as well. And this one weighs 77 grams, so it's super, super light. Even more new to market is this one from Mallard Point. So they've launched, interestingly, both a gin, and I don't know if the wine's on the market yet, but they are going to have the exact same bottle for their wine. So aluminium bottle, they've gone for a swing cap top, and the packaging is really interesting. So the thing that they're doing, by their own admission, they say this isn't new technology, but they're bringing technologies together in a new way. So what they're doing is offering a complete reuse scheme. So whereas the Penrose you might just throw in your own recycling, the Mallard Point is designed to be returned to them, and they will reuse it. So it comes, yeah, you can just about see there. So it comes sort of boxed like that, with some other outer packaging, of course. And then when you finished it, you're encouraged to put it back in here. And what I quite like, that then turns back around, and it actually has your prepaid postage on top as well. And that just all goes back in the post to them. It's fairly new. They don't really yet know how successful it's going to be. Like anything, you need consumers to embrace it. But yeah, so they're kind of combining some different concepts and this reuse sort of scheme.
And I love this, like from an individual distillery point of view, this will be amazing. This works really well. You can put it back in Royal Mail, which, as we know, is one of the most sort of, the infrastructure's there already for it. It just goes straight back in the post. Obviously, if you're a bigger company with many different SKUs, that's maybe not going to be so convenient for you. So it's all about understanding your full life cycle of the product. Where's it going to? Understanding your consumers, how are they going to use this? And the sort of scale associated with that as well.
And I should say as well that the advantage of reuse is that the emissions then associated with production are actually distributed over the entire bottle's life cycle, thereby reducing it. Is that our red light?
Don't know, can't see.
Okay.
Cool. Refills, we're starting to see more and more of these around, whether it's sort of a secondary bottle, like with Harris Gin, or sort of refill in a can, bagging sort of the pouches, and also sort of more like jerry cans with a tap. These are great. You sort of see it across a variety of sort of different parts of the industry. They work really well, I find, in local situations. So Shoreditch, for example, East London Liquor does really well with the refills there. If you're, again, a bigger company, maybe it won't work quite so well in that respect, but then you've got sort of the eco-spirits totes, which are made for that purpose. So again, I just go back to understanding your consumer, how it's going to be shipped, how it's going to be sort of sold, and all of those things, and just thinking really hard about what that is. Because like Sarah mentioned at the beginning, there's no one stop, like there's no perfect solution for everything. You have to just think about everything separately, and nothing's ever going to be perfect. Just do the best that you can. Small steps.
We covered all that. Yeah, so again, I've got some examples of different aluminium refill options, but I'll have those up later because I think we're low on time.
So I mentioned sort of eco-spirits, which again works really well for the on-trade. Obviously, on-trade goes through lots and lots and lots of glass. So if you can supply things in bulk, everything, it makes it better for everyone involved. The only thing you may be missing is the brand identity on the back bar, but you just provide a refillable bottle, so the brand identity stays and you're still doing your bit for sustainability and carbon footprint.
And again, these are just some more examples of creative ways that generally smaller distilleries have tried to provide bulk formats to the on-trade. So you've got Boxer actually started that, I can't remember, a long, long time ago.
Years ago.
2012 maybe. And then Heppel, Electric Spirits, Sapling, East London as well, all trying different ways to service, particularly that local market. I think when you're talking about really local bars, you can kind of embrace these different systems. And yeah, just a quick word on miniatures. Miniatures are really problematic. They very high glass to spirit ratio, generally poor value for consumers, poor margins for producers, and obviously single use. Cooper King's solution is to go for a larger bottle and provide it in this sort of sharing selection. So it's 3 100ml samples, so it's better value. And Volta Aperitivo have just launched this sample kind of set. So they have 6 products. One's a gin, vodka bitters, vermouth. And they launched with these kind of very cute 150ml cans. They've actually just moved up to 200. But they're just, again, they're different solutions for packaging that kind of quantity. And there is just launching a very exciting, but I'm not necessarily meant to talk about, travel retail opportunity for very tiny sort of aluminium bottles, which is hopefully something that the travel industry are going to embrace. Gosh, we've got loads.
So I'll kick this one off. So secondary packaging for me is something which I sort of have a love-hate relationship with. I love it if you can do something with it afterwards. I hate it if I break it down and put it in the bin. I don't care if it's recyclable. We've got a few really good examples of things we just sort of picked out. Ginposium with the lantern. This one's my personal favourite, is the Warner Edwards turns into a little birdhouse. And then you've got sort of pink pepper with the fold-out cocktail booklet and everything. And they're just really well thought through because you don't just have a bunch of rubbish you then have to deal with. Unless your secondary packaging can be fit for purpose or have something a little bit extra, I don't think you should be doing it.
Yeah,
no, you're right, go on.
So Neon here, they make that an optional choice. Their gift box is optional on their website. And making it optional, they've seen consumer demand fall from, I think, 95% to about 60%. So you can see consumers are getting on board. And Johnny Walker have recently ditched all their global travel retail secondary packaging, saving 183 million boxes.
And then you've got, as of December, I think, 2022, Bacardi gift packs are now 100% plastic-free, removing almost 275 tonnes of single-use plastic annually, which is mega huge.
And moving on to shipping packaging. So again, lots of sort of new technologies coming forward. I think we're seeing a lot less air sacs as a rule. FlexiHex is one that's pretty popular. We see quite a lot. So it's made with 85% recycled paper pulp. I think they're beautiful. I love them. I am going to say, for those who don't know, they are manufactured in China and India. But they're compact, they're light, so they're kind of economical to ship. And then we've got some other examples here, some really creative ones. I love Gin Talog use sheep's wool to pack. That's what they have. They have sheep, they shear them, they use the wool. And one of the newest one is this mycelium packaging, which is just launched with Rene Gin. And it is, I've got something here, yeah, farm-grown material made from mushroom roots that are grown around a custom mould. So it's kind of fungus, and it's fully biodegradable within 45 days, and you can compost that at home. So yeah, that's another. Sorry, Becky. I need to crash on. Do you want to take that?
So I touched on sort of Royal Mail. Interestingly, they've got the lowest reported carbon emissions per parcel, which I think just goes back to like, the postman goes down your road every morning. This is an existing supply route. You're not having to set up sort of couriers to go everywhere. It already exists, so therefore you're not really adding too much to it. Again, scale's really important here. If you're a smaller producer, that's going to have a very different impact to if you're a very large producer. You probably wouldn't be able to have like 10,000 parcels picked up every day by Royal Mail. So.
I kind of hate seeing Amazon up there, but that's the reality of economies of scale, so yeah.
Off-trade and export. So this is where I sort of talk more about fit for purpose. Again, if your product isn't getting to where it needs to be in the way that you intend the consumer to enjoy it, you're doing something wrong. So how is it being shipped? Air, sea, road, for example, all of those things have different impacts on how you would essentially package your product. Again, if it breaks in transit, all your sustainable considerations turn into a waste, and sustainability is all about sort of minimising that waste. Vacuity is really important. The air between the liquid and the cork in the bottle, if you don't have it done at the right temperature, in line with weights and measures checks, you risk your bottle popping in transit, or if it gets somewhere warm where it's not 20 degrees. So that's obviously something to consider. And durability as well. Have you transit tested? Something, the Rosie test, as they coined it at Atom, I went to the top of 2 flights of stairs and just dropped it with force. If it doesn't survive, we need to try harder. So yeah, just mainly about sort of making sure it gets to the consumer how you intend it to. I think the other interesting thing here, you touched on Dancing Sands, they're actually using a reusable pallet wrap now as well. Pallet wrap is the devil's work. It's horrible and it gets everywhere and you need a lot of it. So they're now looking at having a reusable one, so they'll they'll ship it with it on and they'll talk to their distributor and they'll bring back, say, maybe 20 at a time or whatever. Again, that's not going to work for everybody, but in certain sort of supply routes, that will work really well. If you've got a dedicated partner who you can rely on to do that for you, that's great.
Got there. Right, in conclusion, some people will probably scoff, but focusing on packaging is a relatively easy way to reduce your carbon footprint.
Yeah, as I've said a couple of times, think hard about your markets and the product life cycle. Where is it going? How's it being shipped? Is it going to be on a shelf? Is it e-com? What's really important? How's it going to get there?
Local, lightweight, recycled and recyclable is best, and I think the real emphasis as well is making it easy for the consumer. The consumer might want this change, but actually it needs to be manageable for them. The focus is on you to make it easy for them, I think.
100%, yeah. Touched on the extended producer responsibility earlier. Basically, you use more environmentally friendly packaging, you'll pay a lower rate. So that's a really positive thing. But I think the other thing to touch on in that is making sure that your systems are set up in a way that you're able to track that in the right way as well. So when all these new regulations come in, it's important you know that you're ticking all your boxes.
And finally, it doesn't have to be perfect. A small change in the right direction is really valuable. That right thing for you, you have to work out what fits your brand and your market. It's not going to be the same for everybody. But I think the important thing is that we all move in that direction. Thank you. There you go.
Your faces. Yeah.
Question, have we got a...
Are you aware of what the increased cost to us is likely to be on EPR?
Oh, I haven't looked into any of it in great detail.
Well, the WSTA are reckoning it, whatever you pay on your PRNs at the moment, is going to be 10 to 15 times that amount.
Wow. That's a lot.
Online company, I've got to get the figures right, they're paying about $500,000 on their PRNs. They reckon they're going to be paying in excess of 10 million. It is a frightening cost.
Yeah.
And
it's...
however you lightweight, it's still going to be there.
Yeah.
But it's the most inflationary cost I can think of for our trade at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's about minimising that as much as possible. It's going to happen. It's sort of unavoidable, unfortunately.
Possibly it may be delayed.
Okay.
It must be an election year.
Hi.
It's a quick question. I don't know if you can answer it. It was regarding the Mallard point. You mentioned that they're suggesting consumers send it back for them to reuse. Do you know how they're getting over the duty stamp issue?
That is a great question. I don't, I'm afraid. I can try and find out. I don't. I know they're sort of rewashing and rebottling.
My suspicion is that they would probably scrub down the whole bottle and repackage the label, all of the labels. That would be my assumption.
Yeah.
Because that looks printed. I don't know.
It's
stuck on, is it?
Type B, yeah.
So I imagine maybe they just remove that. I know their plan is that basically it stays intact until it needs relabeling or repainting, which is something that they will do. So I imagine they remove that and start afresh.
Okay.
Even offering a refill service in your distillery is a very grey area for the duty stamp.
Yeah.
Yeah, some certainly reapply everything, but yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Hi there, that was very interesting. I have a question about paper labels versus printing on bottles because it wasn't covered. And I just wondered if you had an opinion.
Yeah, it's something we sort of touched on briefly before and sort of thought, we've got so much in there already, we don't want to add that in. But in terms of labels themselves, I think they are probably, I don't want to say the thing you need to worry about least, but they're not the biggest hurdle to overcome. Most of labels are actually destroyed in the recycling process when you put your glass in the recycling anyway. It'll either be burnt off with something, and so it sort of just goes into that waste part, which then gets burnt and turned into fuel, as far as I'm aware. So it depends, again, what sort of inks you're using when you're doing direct to bottle, because if they're not environmentally friendly inks, then is that better or worse than paper?
And one of my big problems with doing the ink was I had to send it to a third party which was actually 1,100 miles away. So
then you've got the impact of that transport. Yeah.
But what I wanted to do was have people reuse my bottle And what I found with the label is you've got to sit there for hours getting this label off because they don't want to put like tacky stuff on that comes off when you've got it in the back bar.
Well, that's the thing is most labels use a permanent adhesive, which when you peel, because you don't want it to come off. But yeah, I mean, if I was going to suggest, I'd probably say the direct-to-bottle printing in that situation where there's a carbon footprint on their label delivery. But again, you're dealing with minimum order quantities of that sort of thing as well. So again, it depends what's right for that product.
I think anecdotally, I've seen a real move towards ink directly on bottle, and people talking about using environmentally friendly.
And there are good inks actually out there, certainly.
Any others? Yeah, we're good. Everyone wants coffee. Okay. If anyone wants to come and look at the packaging samples, I'll have them up here for a bit as well. Okay, thanks so much.